Okay, tonight I want to talk about the coming food shortage. Now, there's scripture in the Bible that says there's going to be a famine. Unfortunately, it doesn't say that it's going to happen in 2022 or 2023. It doesn't tell us that. But really, there are some things that I think is important for us to consider and to understand. You may not agree with this, but I personally believe we are in the last days of the last days. I personally believe that. And if you want to think I'm a radical nut job, that's okay. I've been called worse. I worked in the marketplace for many years, so I've been called a lot worse. But that's okay. But I want to just share with you some things, and I wrote me a couple of pages of notes here. I don't even know if I can follow them because this thing is just bigger than me. But I'll share with you some things that I've seen from the Scriptures. I've learned and see that famine is never a blessing. It is always the judgment of God. If you look back through the Old Testament, there were times of famine. There were different seasons of famine. It was always the judgment of God. It never was a blessing. So, in the New Testament, concerning the end times, famine is talked about as being both a birth pain and a very serious judgment during the tribulation. A birth pain before tribulation and a very serious judgment during the tribulation. It is, I believe that my personal belief is that we're beginning to experience a pre-rapture famine or a pre-rapture shortage of food. I don't see it getting to the point in the United States where thousands of people die from starvation. But I think we will see it in other parts of the world. And I do think that we will experience, we're already experiencing shortages on the food shelves, the grocery stores. If I don't shop, I don't go to the stores, but I watch the news, I keep up with it, and I see it on the news all the time. Mike can tell you that as she has shopped for the church at Sam's, that there are things that are no longer there and don't know when they'll have them. So I think we're going to begin to see more and more of that. When have you ever seen in your lifetime times like they are today? Is anybody? I'm not talking about just food shortage. I'm talking about all of the things that we see going on in our world today. I've never seen this before. I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen empty grocery shelves. Have you? Not in this country. Not here. I wish we knew the exact countries, all of the countries that are involved. We know some, but I'm not going to begin to pretend that I know all of them, but I know this. I know what I see happening. For one thing, China is big in the news now. China is a major player and is a major player in end times. In that part of the world, along with the Middle East, China is one of the most austere countries concerning even this latest pestilence, is what I call it, the COVID. China probably had some of the worst responses to COVID. For example, today in Shanghai, there are 26 million. Oh, well, let me just show you this while we're talking about the food. I saw this. I read this in Epoch Times newspaper the other day. This was a sign on an empty grocery shelf. Due to high demand, these items will be limited to two per person. Bread, paper towels, bath tissue, case water, gallon milk, hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes. Have y'all seen anything like that locally? My has. She shops, and some of you others have. This is according to Bloomberg News. Shanghai has been officially easing a lockdown that its 25 million residents homebound for nearly 2 months. And let me tell you something. They were homebound, and they had officers on the street making sure people didn't leave their homes. Homebound for nearly 2 months, following a decline in COVID-19 cases. But look at the next part. But an army of zealous grassroots volunteers who police housing compounds are still banning many people from going outside. And we know a little bit about lockdowns in this country, but nothing compared to China. 25 million people in lockdown. Look at Matthew chapter 24. In Matthew chapter 24, look if you will, beginning in verse 4. The disciples, and we've talked about this recently. Let's go back and look at verse 24, chapter 1, verse 1. As Jesus left and was going out of the temple complex, his disciples came up and called his attention to the temple buildings. You know, I may have shared with you the time before, I'm always amused, Brother Dan, when I read that. Look what it says. They called his attention to the temple buildings like he didn't know anything about them. Like he was totally unaware of anything about them. They called his attention to him, and then he replied to them, "Don't you see all these things? I assure you not one stone will be left here on another that will not be thrown down." So here, just get this picture. To me, it's really amusing. The disciples, they'd been in the temple, they'd been praying and worship and Bible study and whatever, and they walk outside, and Jesus is walking there with them, and they just say, hold it right there, Jesus, just look. And so he turns around and they say, "Look at these magnificent buildings. Look at this complex building facility, how awesome it is." Like he didn't know anything about them. But look what he says. And then he replied to them, "Don't you see all these things? I assure you not one stone will be left here on another that will not be thrown down." Now, I've tried to get there, but I can't. I've tried to get there and see through the eyes of Jesus the looks on their face when he said that. Because they didn't have a clue about what he was talking about. You know what he was talking about here? He was talking about in AD 70 under Titus when the Romans literally laid Jerusalem to waste. That's what he was talking about. They couldn't see it. One of the reasons they couldn't see it is because they had the wrong idea about who Jesus was and the kingdom that he came to set up. It wasn't about an earthly kingdom, but they're still thinking earthly things. And so they didn't have a clue what he was talking about. I find it amusing that they didn't say, "Well, explain that to us." But notice what they did ask. While he was sitting in the Mount of Olives, the disciples approached him privately and said, "Tell us, when will these things happen? And what is the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" They didn't ask, "Tell us what you know about this magnificent temple being destroyed. How do you know that? And where do you get that?" They didn't ask about that. They ask about when these things will happen and what will be the signs of the end times. And then Jesus said in verse 4, replied to them, "Watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name saying, 'I am the Messiah,' and they will deceive many. You are going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, because these things must take place, but the end is not yet." Notice that. He says these things must take place before, but the end is not yet. So he goes on to say, you're going to hear of these wars, rumors of wars and all that stuff. And he says in verse 7, for nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. And all these events are the what? Beginning of birth pains. Now, all you ladies that have babies, you're familiar with birth pains, right? Notice that he said, these things are going to happen. They're like birth pains, but the end is not yet. So I believe that he's saying even before the tribulation, the actual 7-year tribulation begins, the world's going to begin to see all of these signs that are coming together. And he said, understand, these are birth pains. Well, what is typical of birth pains? They start out light and time between. But the closer it comes to birthing that precious baby, the closer the pains get and the more severe they become. Here's what he's saying. You're going to start to see all of these things happen, and they're going to start off like birth pains, but they're going to increase and get much worse. Well, I want you to think about a few things. There's always been wars, right? Ever since the beginning of time, there's always been wars. But when have you ever seen wars going on and then rumors of more wars about to take place or looking very likely that it will take place? And they're not in one particular part of the world, they're in different parts of the world. So we're hearing that. Russia and Ukraine's fighting now. It's involving different parts of Europe. Now they're afraid of China attacking Taiwan, and so there's all of that stuff going on. It just seems like it's growing bigger and bigger and bigger. Watch this. So he says all these events are the beginning of birth pains. So today, I think we're seeing the birth pains of famine. That means that when he talks about the end, he's talking about birth pains for two births or two events. One being the rapture, because I believe the rapture, Scripture teaches rapture is going to take place, and then the tribulation follows. So what's about to be birthed? If, in fact, our times are, we are in the birth pains of the end times, what's about to be birthed? The rapture and the tribulation, right? Notice that he mentions pestilences. Famines and earthquakes in various places. Where did I see pestilence? Maybe I was reading in... Well, see, I'm reading from... I read it today, I think, in the New King James, and this is the Holman, and mine doesn't mention famines there, but it's there. Do I? 7. It's not in the Holman. Oh, I beg your pardon, it is too. There will be famines. What famine have we just come out of? Or not famine, pestilence. What pestilence we just come out of? COVID. What's the next one behind that they're talking about? I think it's going to be one right after another of some sort. It's just going to keep coming, I believe. Coming out of a 2-year pandemic, and this is a picture when I studied or read about the Shanghai lockdowns. let's see here. Oh, that was the article. That was just a picture they had where they literally, this is these volunteers who were enforcing lockdowns. And then he also mentions volcanic activity. Notice what he says. He says earthquakes in various places, which will involve volcanoes. There's a map. I don't know if you can make that out, Brett. Can you? It was the best one I could find. But here's my point. Look from this is the layout of the world, but look all the way across it. There are hot spots of volcanoes. They're not just in one little isolated part of the world. They're all across the globe. Concerning earthquakes, the National Earthquake Information Center recorded long-term records since 1900. We expect about 16 major earthquakes in any given year. That includes 15 earthquakes in the magnitude 7 range and 1 earthquake magnitude 8.0 or greater. And that's just from the National Earthquake Information. In the past 40 to 50 years, and you can look this up, this is on record, our records show that we have exceeded the long-term average number of earthquakes about a dozen times. That's in the last 40 to 50 years. We'll come back to that. So, earthquakes, volcanic activity, increasing worldwide, wars, rumors of wars. But here's something else, higher prices, the highest inflation rate in 40 years. Part of that is because of the shortage of supplies, right? Look at Revelation chapter 6. Revelation chapter 6, that's the beginning of the tribulation. These are the seals that John talks about. Chapter 6, verse 1. Then I saw the Lamb open one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there was a white horse. The horseman on it had a bow. A crown was given to him, and he went out as a victor to conquer. That is the Antichrist riding on the white horse. He says in verse 3, when he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Then another horse went out, a fiery red one, and its horseman was empowered to take peace from the earth so that the people would slaughter one another, and a large sword was given to him. So here's this rider on the red horse. What did it say? He said he came to take peace away from the earth. And people will be slaughtering one another like we've never seen before. Now, if you think people killing one another is bad today, what is that to say? You ain't seen nothing yet. It's going to get worse. That's going to become just a daily thing where people literally kill one another on the streets. If you think it's bad now, it's really going to be bad. Church is not going to be here, and I'm glad. It's bad enough already. But somebody's going to live through this horrible time. The third seal, notice when he says, verse 5, then he opened the third seal, and I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and there was a black horse, and the horseman on it had a set of scales in his hand. And then I heard something like a voice among the 4 living creatures say, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, but do not harm the oil, olive oil, and the wine." So here's what he's saying. I'll just paraphrase that. Here's what he's saying. He described me as having a set of scales. What he's saying is a day's wage will be equal to a day's supply of food. That's all it's going to be worth. Time, and there's some contributing factors that we'll talk about that here in just a minute. But what he's saying is a day's wage, it'll take a day's wage to buy a day's worth of food supply. So, if we're saying that we are in the birth pains, the beginning of famine, what's causing it? Well, first of all, Russia and Ukraine are at war with one another. Ukraine and Russia together, they supply about 1/3 of the world's demand for wheat. Now, you think about a pie, and you cut out 1/3 of that pie, that they supply an awful lot of wheat around the world. Well, Ukraine can't do it now because they're under attack from Russia. Russia can't import or export because of the sanctions, right? They can't import or import because of the sanctions against them. They can't ship any wheat out, and nothing can come into the country. As a matter of fact, let's see, no, I've got that in this note. This, you can look this up. This was from the Jerusalem Post. 50,000 tons of Israeli produce is at risk of being destroyed due to Ukraine war, easy for you to say, Ukraine war. Food rescue group Liket launches urgent appeal as Israeli farm exports to Russia and Ukraine grind to a halt. Due to the sanctions on Russia, Israeli farmers are destroying thousands of tons of fresh vegetables as produce exports to Russia and Ukraine have ground to a halt due to the ongoing war. Carrots, celery, potatoes, radishes, and more are involved. Up to 50,000 tons of agricultural products are rotting in warehouses or face certain destruction. What did he say about that third seal? Verse 5, when he opened the third seal, I heard a third of the living creatures say, come. And I looked, and there was a black horseman on it, sat the scales in his hand. Then I heard something like a voice among the four creatures say, a quart of wheat for a denarius, 3 quarters of barley for a denarius. You want to know why food prices are going up? That's part of the reason. And I don't see it getting better. That's only part of the reason. Notice what he says. The fourth seal. When he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice from the voice of the fourth living creature say, and I looked, and there was a pale green horse, and the horseman on it his name was Death, and Hades was following after him. Authority was given to him over, watch this, 1/4 of the earth to kill by sword. There are 4 ways. Kill by sword, famine, plague, or pestilences, and by the wild animals of the earth. So, here, you're probably going to think I'm a nut job. But I had to get something like, I had to try to get my mind wrapped around that. 1/4 of the population of the world is going to die during this time. And they're going to die by one of 4 means. And he tells us what they are. War, famine, a plague like COVID, or wild beasts of the earth. 1/4. So if there are 8 billion people in the world, let's take 1 billion of those and say they were raptured. And I think that's pretty conservative. 1 billion are raptured. That leaves 7 million. So if you divide 7 million by 4, that's 1.7 billion. So if 1.7 billion people die by each of these 4 methods, if you use starvation as one of those, are you following me? And starvation kills a fourth of those four. You're talking about 420 some odd million people dying of starvation. Does that kind of help you get how horrible this famine, this starvation is going to be? It's going to be terrible, but more than you can imagine. That's what I had to do in order to try to get some kind of feeling for how horribly difficult it's going to be for people who are left here just starving to death. I don't know, maybe that might not help you, but it kind of helps me get it in perspective. So let me give you some reasons why we're seeing food shortages now. First of all, have y'all read anything about this? You have? Confirmation of highly pathogenic avian influenza in commercial and backyard flocks. So, something like over 23 million chickens and turkeys have been destroyed because of this avian flu. It is a virus that affects wild ducks, geese, so forth, wild fowl, but it is a deathly virus for a chicken and turkey. So there's going to be, this is one of the reasons the price of eggs are going sky high. Did y'all see? And as a matter of fact, I have it right here. I'll tell you about it in a minute. But have you, did any of you see on the news where these chicken houses, or one that I saw, was on fire? And it was on fire from one end to the other, totally engulfed. And these things are like how long? 200 feet long? Huh? Yeah, 200 or 300 feet long. And it was engulfed in flames from one end to the other. I don't think that was an accident. But you want to know why the price of chickens, the price of poultry, and eggs are going up? That's one reason why. Another reason is historically bad crops in China. And remember, we said China's the number one consumer of wheat. So it's important to them to raise good wheat crops. Well, they've not had good crops. And this year, well, says this winter, the wheat condition could be the worst in history. In the history of all of their wheat seasons, this year is the worst. %71 of the U.S. winter wheat crop affected by drought. Now, I grew up in Oklahoma, and we had lots of wheat. And I remember a day when I was a kid, we'd get out of school, and it was time to get combines and trucks ready to go on wheat harvest. Well, the first thing we'd do is we'd come down to Gainesville and we'd cut maize. And when we got through cutting maize down around Gainesville, Texas, it was time to go back home and we could cut wheat. And there were thousands of acres of wheat at home, and we would cut wheat. And by the time we finished cutting in Oklahoma, it was time to cut in Kansas. And we'd work our way all the way up to the Canadian border. We'd cut wheat all summer long. Well, if you go up to where I grew up, that used to be thousands of acres of wheat land, you know what's on it now? Windmills. These electric windmills. You want to know why? Because the government will pay them more to put a windmill on their country than they can make farming wheat. I think the government I think the federal government doesn't want us producing anything. They want us to be totally dependent upon other countries. That's a bad position to be in. The minister's comments underscore concerns about China's grain supply at the same time as the war between Russia and Ukraine, which together account for 29% of the global wheat exports, has disrupted supplies, causing wheat prices to surge to 14-year high. Winter wheat conditions also worsened in Texas and Oklahoma as the drought deepened. More than 86% of Texas and more than 88% of Oklahoma was covered by drought. And in Kansas, the figure was nearly 60%, in Nebraska, 35%. That's a major wheat producing country. They've been in a drought. So all of that contributes to shortage and high prices. The fourth thing is skyrocketing fuel and fertilizer prices. I found this in the news. Looming, and this was Bloomberg, I think, reported this. Looming food shortages is the next slow-moving disaster to hit the world. Food prices are already skyrocketing, some a lot. Of this comes from inflation caused by runaway government spending over the past 2 years. They just passed a spending bill of $739 billion that you and I are going to have to pay for. The ironic thing is part of that was used to hire 87,000 IRS agents who are going to stay at home and work from home to investigate people like us who are out there in the marketplace making a living so they can extract taxes from us to pay them for sitting at home and investigating us. Yeah. So, in the U.S. alone, we would lose 40% of our crops if we couldn't fertilize. The average farmer can't afford to plant and harvest and transport because fuel costs are up 400%. Another reason, sanctions on Russia. Some is from supply chain issues, but a new problem is rearing its head, and the government officials seem as likely to make it worse as to make it better. The problem is shortages of food and fertilizer brought about by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the sanctions enacted upon the West in response. Ukraine is a major wheat producer, but war is likely to ensure a poor spring planting harvest. Russia is also a major grower, but sanctions and from exporting to most of the world. Russia is also a major manufacturer of fertilizer. Did y'all know that? It is the world's largest, and we're at war with Russia right now. Second is on the list is China, is a nation aligned with Russia and notably unfriendly to the United States and the West. Canada is a distant third, and that's got people really concerned. Fertilizer index hit record, threatening higher food prices. All of this is influencing the food supply. The surge of North American nutrient gauge surpasses 2008 peak. Rising prices threaten farmers and exacerbate food inflation. Not to mention the supply chains crisis, all those ships that are stalled out there off the coast of California. During COVID, y'all remember seeing this on the news? During COVID, when COVID was at its peak, even if they could have brought the ships into the harbor, to the port, the workers were not there to work it. If the workers had been there to work it, to offload the ships, there were no trucks to unload it to. There were no drivers to transport it. So there's a shortage. But it's not only in food. I've got a pump out here on the Cook Creek Road. I've been waiting 4 months for a little electrical component that causes my pumps to alternate from one to the other. It's a little relay. and I've been waiting 4 months to get it. It's everything. I just thought we were living in immoral times. I have never seen it like I see it today. I found this on the internet today and confirmed it. Naples United Church of Christ will be hosting a teen LGBTQ plus event on Saturday featuring a drag show and a forbidden queer literature. The Naples United Church of Christ is under fire for planning a youth pride concert that will feature a drag show and forbidden queer literature while they're asking children to list their pronouns. The free one-day event for children between the ages of 12 to 18 is scheduled to take place on May 21st, which was this past May 21st, Naples United Methodist Christ. There are churches that are pro-abortion. There are churches that are pro-LGBTQ, RST, UVWXYZs. I mean, they lean that way. There are progressive preachers in the pulpits, and these are the churches that when the rapture happens, they're going to continue on every week just like they have been all this time. We're living in some very dark, difficult time. I believe we're beginning to see the birth pains of the tribulation. We're not in the tribulation. The church is not going through the tribulation. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, Paul says that God will deliver us from the wrath to come. That's 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. But he says in chapter 1, we've not been appointed to God's wrath. So we're not going through the tribulation. But I believe we will experience some of the birth pains because he says, all these things you'll begin to see, but the end is not yet. One more verse. Look at Luke 21. Luke 21. Look at verse 25. Then there will be signs in the sun, the moon, and stars, and there will be anguish on the earth among the nations, bewildered by the roaring sea and waves. People will faint from fear and expectation of the things that are coming on the world, because the celestial powers will be shaken. Even and Paul mentions this in Romans chapter 8, I believe, about how even creation is beginning to groan because of the sin and the oppression of sin in our world. So even the celestial bodies. Did you know that? Oh, by the way, this is a list. If you want to take it, and we'll make you a copy. This is 25. This is a list of 25 food processing plants that have mysteriously been burnt. This article was from back in May, I think May the 2nd, 2022. On Saturday evening, a fire broke out in the Purdue Farms facility in South Norfolk area, Chesapeake, North Carolina. 10 days ago, a small plane crashed within a mile of the runway of the Covington, Georgia Municipal Airport, hitting a General Mills food facility. On and on and on and on it goes. There are 25, and you can look them up. It actually happened. All of them food processing plants that have been destroyed by fire. So it's here if you want to get a copy of it and take a look at it. So I just gave you some reasons why we're going to experience food shortage and what they're saying we're going to experience. And those are some reasons why. Yes. Yeah, I think Bill Gates owns probably more farmland in the United States than anybody anybody. China just bought up thousands of acres in North Dakota, I think. North Dakota, someplace up there, very close to a military base. Why is the federal government letting China buy up our land? Here's what I was going to tell you about the celestial bodies that he talks about. Did you know that NASA has been tracking an asteroid, and it's going to come very close, if not hit the Earth, they say, very possibly in 2029. And it's traveling something like 30,000 miles an hour. And when it hits, if it does hit the Earth, it'll be devastating. But another concern is that as it moves, if it misses and moves past the Earth, that some of the debris that the magnetic field draws to itself will hit the Earth. The name of it is Apophis. I think it's, Apophis, Apophis. And the name Apophis means, it's an Egyptian word for the great serpent. Isn't that one of the names of the devil? You can look it up. Go in there, go online and just type in Apophis, the asteroid Apophis, and read up on it. It'll tell you. Yeah. I know that's probably not one of your best Bible studies, but my point is because here's something that we literally can see it happening. We can see it happening. And Scripture tells us that that's part of the birth pains that we will experience. And I believe the birth pains are pointing to the birth of the rapture and the tribulation. The bad famine comes during the tribulation. Okay, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.